You walk out to the tomato patch on a damp June morning. The dew sits heavy on the leaves, and you stop between the rows to look down. You see two tomato plants side by side. They came from the same seed packet, started their lives on the exact same afternoon in the window box, and went into identical Lancaster County soil on the day the frost left us. Yet, as you stand there looking, one of them stands near twice as tall as its neighbor. It has a stem as thick as a man's thumb, covered in those fine, stiff hairs that show a vine's true strength. Its leaves are a deep, midnight green, and if you look close under the branches, it is already setting little green tomatoes, hard and round as marbles. Now look at its twin, just a foot away. It sits there small, pale, and bare. Its lowest leaves are turning the color of old straw, and its stem is thin enough that a sharp wind might snap it. A man looks at that sight, and his mind goes straight to luck or sickness. He thinks one plant simply got a better spot in the row, or maybe a worm chewed the roots of the small one. He figures he needs to run to the garden store and buy a heavy plastic tub of that bright blue powder, the kind that costs $20 and promises miracles in 24 hours. He will take that chemical salt, dissolve it in a bucket until the water turns an unnatural neon blue and pour it right over the leaves. But it was no luck, and it was no sickness. And that expensive blue powder is not what the strong plant wanted. The strong one got fed something the weak one never saw, and it is a thing that costs almost nothing. I am Elias. My family came over from the Palatinate in 1838, bringing nothing but a few chests, some dried seeds, and the habits of working the earth. We have grown tomatoes in this Lancaster County ground every single summer since the year we cleared the first trees. And I will tell you plainly, without any varnish, the secret to a strong, heavy-bearing tomato plant is never found in a factory-made bottle from a store shelf. It is a thing you can stir up in your own kitchen using what is already sitting in the corner of your pantry. You do not spray it on the leaves, and you do not force it down the throat of the vine. You pour it gently on the ground, and you let the earth do the rest. A neighbor of mine rode past my fence last July, saw my rows bending under the weight of the fruit, and he laughed. He called it my magic elixir. I told him right there, leaning on my spade, that there is no magic in it at all. There is only old sense. But I will admit, when you see those two plants standing side by side in the morning sun, one thriving and the other starving, it does look like a piece of wonder. Stop and think about this for a moment. Understand this clearly, because once you see this one truth, you will garden differently for the rest of your days. You are not feeding the plant. You are feeding the soil, and the soil is what feeds the plant. This is the whole secret, and almost every modern grower has the matter entirely backward. Folks today think a fertilizer is just food you hand straight to the plant, like setting a plate of food in front of a hungry child. So they buy that fast-acting powder that dumps concentrated nitrogen and harsh salts right at the hair roots. The plant has no choice. It gulps that water down, shoots up fast and green, but it grows weak. Its cell walls are stretched too thin, like a balloon filled with too much air. The first heavy rain beats it down, and every pest in the county can smell how soft it is. My grandfather would have shaken his head at that kind of farming. He taught me when I was no higher than his belt that the ground beneath our boots is not just dead dirt, meant to hold a plant upright. The ground is alive. There is a whole hidden world down there, an empire of little living things beyond our counting. They are the ones that actually carry the food to the root. They unlock the minerals that are already sleeping deep in your dirt, and they hand them to the tomato vine in a form the plant can actually stomach and use. Now, I must be honest with you about the limits of this way. I am not here to sell you a dream, and I will not tell you this tonic fixes every mistake a man can make. If you plant your tomatoes in the deep shade of an old oak tree where the sun never shines, this will not save them. If you leave your patch to drown in a low hollow where the water sits stagnant until it smells of rot, this brew will not drain the swamp for you. And if your ground is nothing but pure river sand with no organic matter at all, you cannot expect a few cups of this to turn it into a rich bottomland overnight. This is a tonic to awaken life, not a substitute for common diligence. It works where there is a soil to be awakened. The old people in our valleys knew this by the smell of the earth after a spring turning. They could tell by the feel of the crumbly loam between their fingers whether the ground was awake or sleeping. Today, you can go to the big agricultural universities, and the men in white coats with their high-powered microscopes will tell you the exact same thing. They talk about the soil microbiome, about mycorrhizal fungi and beneficial bacteria. They use large, heavy words, but they are only describing what my grandfather watched happening in his rows 80 years ago. It is not folk superstition. It is the ancient law of the earth, proven by time and confirmed by the very tools of the modern world. So why do we spend our hard-earned silver on those blue powders every spring? Why do we truck back and forth to the store for bags of synthetic chemicals that leave the ground crusty and hard after the summer heat fades? How did the old people grow fields that fed entire towns without a single plastic jug? The answer is simple, but it requires you to look at the garden with open eyes. This tonic I am speaking of is not really plant food at all. It is a live brew that targets the life in the dirt. It costs pennies. It uses 4 basic things you likely have within arm's reach right now, and it works with the nature of the ground rather than against it. When you give the soil what it actually craves, the tiny organisms multiply by the millions, and they begin to dig, soften, and enrich the earth around your roots. Let us step inside the kitchen now, away from the heat of the morning, and I will show you the 4 things we need, how we prepare the water, and the exact patient way we bring this live tonic to its full strength before it ever touches a single square inch of your garden. We sit here at the wooden table where my mother rolled her bread dough, and we look at 4 simple things that most folks pass by every day without a thought. To make 1 gallon of this tonic, you do not need a laboratory, and you do not need a heavy wallet. You need plain baking yeast, blackstrap molasses, a cup of real buttermilk, and a single teaspoon of baking soda. That is the whole army. But before we mix a single spoonful, we must talk about the water. Water is not just water when it comes to the life in the dirt. Stop and think about this. Why does town water stay so clear and crisp in the iron pipes under the street? Why does it never grow green or turn sour, even if it sits for weeks? It is because the county or the town puts chlorine into it. They do that for a good reason, to kill off any small living thing that might make a child sick. But what are we trying to do here in this kitchen? We are trying to wake life up. We are trying to brew a living host to feed the soil. If you take water straight from a modern tap, cold and sharp with chemicals, you are pouring a poison right onto the very organisms you want to invite into your garden. It is exactly the opposite of old sense. My family has always caught the rain. It comes off the wide cedar shingles of the barn, down through a tin spout, and into a charred oak barrel that sits at the corner of the wall. That rainwater is free, it is clean, and it carries the softness of the sky with it. It has nothing in it to harm a living microbe. If you have no rain barrel under your eaves, do not despair. You can take your tap water, pour it into a wide-mouthed bucket, and leave it sitting open to the air for 24 hours. The chlorine is a light gas. Given time and an open sky, it will lift right off the surface and leave the water clean enough for our purpose. Or, if you have a clean spring or an old well nearby, use that. Now, look at the temperature. This is where the impatient man ruins his work before he even begins. The water must be lukewarm, what my grandmother called blood warm. If you dip your finger into it, it should feel like a mild bath, neither hot nor cold. If it is too cold, the yeast will sleep right through it, and nothing will happen. If it is too hot, even by a little bit, you will scald the yeast and kill it dead. A dead yeast cannot wake a sleeping soil. Let us take our gallon of warm, clean water and pour it into a deep stoneware crock or a large glass jar. The first thing to go in is the molasses, 2 tablespoons. I prefer the dark, thick blackstrap molasses, the kind that moves slow as winter grease and smells deep and sweet like late autumn. White sugar will do the work if your cupboard is bare, but white sugar is a lazy thing. It has been stripped of its skin. Blackstrap molasses still holds the iron, the potash, the magnesium, and the calcium that came out of the cane field. It is a richer food that stays in the dirt longer. Stir that dark syrup into the warm water until it disappears, turning the whole gallon the color of weak tea. Now comes the heart of the matter, the yeast. Plain baking yeast from a small paper packet or a tablespoon from a brown glass jar. If you keep a live bread starter on your counter, a good scoop of that works just as well. Take that tablespoon of yeast and sprinkle it gently across the top of your dark water. Understand this. Do not stir it in. Leave your spoon on the table. If you stir it down immediately, you choke it. It needs to lay on the surface where it can breathe the air and drink the sweet warmth from below at its own leisure. This is the moment where most modern folks fail, because the modern world has made us all too fast. We want to shake a bottle, pour it out, and see a miracle before the sun goes down. But the earth does not work on the clock of a town man. You must wait. Give it 3 hours at the least. But if you want the full strength, leave that jar sitting on your kitchen corner overnight. When you walk into the kitchen the next morning, before you even put the coffee pot on the stove, go look at your jar. If the work is right, you will see a thick tan froth sitting on top of the water, a rich bubbling head like a fresh glass of cellar ale. You will smell something clean and sharp like bread dough rising under a cloth. That froth is the sound of millions of tiny workers coming awake, feeding on the molasses, and multiplying. If you see that foam, your tonic is alive and it is ready to do its duty. If the surface is as flat and still as a puddle in winter, your yeast was old or your water was too hot. Do not waste your time pouring dead water on your plants. Pour it out and start again. Better to learn patience from a bucket than to watch your garden sit bare. Once that foam is thick and alive, we stir in the last two helpers. First, a cup of real sour buttermilk. The buttermilk brings calcium to the mix, and a tomato plant is always hungry for calcium. When a man grows a beautiful, large tomato and he goes to pick it only to find the bottom is black, sunken, and rotten, that is blossom end rot. It is not a disease you can spray away. It is simply the plant crying out for calcium it could not find in the dirt. The buttermilk helps head that misery off before it ever starts, and it gives the vine the strength to build tough cell walls that can hold heavy fruit. Last of all, we add exactly 1 teaspoon of baking soda. No more. A man thinks if a teaspoon is good, a cup must be grand, but too much soda will ruin the sweetness of the soil surface. That single spoonful settles the sharp sourness right where the stem meets the earth, making that narrow ring a hard place for the molds and blights to take hold. Now the gallon is made. It is dark, it is foaming, and it smells of life. But how we carry this from the kitchen out to the dirt is where a man's pride can still trip him up. If you are careless now, you can do more harm than a long drought. Let us carry the crock out to the rows, and I will show you the exact measure and the one rule you must never break when you pour it. We walk back down the gravel path to the rows, the clay jar heavy in my hands. The morning sun is higher now, warming the dirt, and you can smell the damp earth waking up. Before you tilt that jar, I want you to pause. Stop and think about what you are holding. This is not a dead liquid. It is a living community. And because it is alive, how you introduce it to the ground matters just as much as what you put in the pot. The first rule, the one you must never break, is that you never pour this tonic onto bone-dry earth. If you have had 3 days of hot sun and your garden soil is cracked and dusty as an old road, do not go rushing out with your jar. Pouring a strong living brew onto bone-dry roots will shock them, and the dry dirt will suck the moisture out of the tiny microbes before they can find their footing. It is like handing a heavy plate of salted meat to a man dying of thirst. Water your garden lightly first with plain water. Let the ground become damp, dark, and soft. When the soil is already wet, it welcomes the tonic, and the living yeast can swim right down into the spaces between the crumbs of earth where it belongs. The second thing to watch is where you pour. Look down at the plant. You do not pour this over the leaves, and you do not dump it right against the main stem where it goes into the ground. If you wet the leaves with a rich brew like this, you are just inviting the wild molds and the dark blights to come and feast on the sugars. Instead, you pour it in a circle, out a few inches from the stem. Think of it like a ring around the plant, right where the outer branches end. Understand this. A tomato plant does not drink from the thick wood of its center. It feeds from the tiny white hair roots that stretch outward through the dark, searching for moisture. By pouring your tonic in a ring a few inches out, you are placing the food exactly where those scouting roots are reaching. The life in the soil will grow and multiply outward, and the roots of your tomato will grow strong and deep to meet it. Now, here is the place where a man's own pride trips him up, and I see it happen season after season. A fellow will make this batch, see his plants respond, and immediately his mind starts working. He thinks to himself, if 1 spoonful of yeast made my vines this thick, 3 spoonfuls will turn them into trees. He goes back to the kitchen, mixes a brew 3 times as strong, and drenches his patch morning and night. Do not do it. Too much of a good thing will throw the whole ground out of balance. If you overfeed the soil life, the microbes will multiply too fast. They will crowd each other out, and they will dump more nitrogen into the roots than the vine can handle. You will end up with a tomato plant that looks beautiful to a foolish eye. Big, bushy, dark green, and 8 feet tall, but it will be all leaf and no fruit. It will spend all its strength showing off its clothes, and leave you nothing to pick for the table when August comes. The old measure is the right measure. For a little seedling that you just set out in the dirt, a few drops or a single tablespoon near the base twice a week is all it takes to set the roots deep. For a young plant growing in a clay pot on the porch, a 1/4 of a cup is plenty. And for a grown vine standing in the open garden, up to 1 full cup once or twice a week is the honest limit. The rest of the time, you water normal with the rain from your barrel. This is a tonic to spark the fire, not the wood to keep it burning. If you hold to that small, honest dose, you will begin to see the change within a week. First, the pale color leaves the lower branches, replaced by a deep, healthy green that looks like the pine woods in winter. Then the stems will thicken, growing stout enough to stand against the July storms without trembling. Soon after, the yellow flowers will arrive, and every flower is a tomato promising to come. Let me tell you plainly who profits from you not knowing this. I do not say this to rile your temper, but so you can see the shape of the world we live in. There is no money to be made in caught rainwater, a spoonful of baker's yeast, and a jar of molasses from the kitchen shelf. You already own them. and the sky gives the water for nothing. But there is a vast mountain of silver made every year by selling you that bright blue chemical powder in the plastic tub. Year after year, spring after spring, that fast, salty powder feeds the plant directly and bypasses the living earth entirely. Over the years, it leaves your soil poorer, harder, and more dead than it found it. The ground becomes dependent, like a man who forgets how to hunt because someone hands him a loaf of bread every morning. When the soil is dead, you have no choice but to buy more blue powder the next spring just to get a crop. A tonic that builds your soil richer makes you less dependent over time. A powder that starves the ground makes you need the store more. One of those two is a far better business for the factory, but it is not the one that helps your grandchildren inherit a living piece of land. So there is the whole of it, handed down from my family to yours. Feed the soil, and let the soil feed the plant the way the Lord set the earth up to work from the beginning. Now, I want to hear from you. And I ask it honestly because I learned the nature of this whole country through the stories folks leave behind. Tell me in the comments below, what are you putting in the ground this season? Have you ever tried feeding the life in your dirt instead of just pouring fertilizer on the vine? And tell me your county and what your dirt feels like when you turn it, whether it is heavy gray clay, thin river sand, or that good black loam. I read every single word. Next time we gather, I want to show you how we make a compost pile that never stinks. Most folks avoid composting because their pile turns into a sour, slimy, reeking mess that brings the flies from 3 farms over. But the old people knew how to build sweet-smelling, black earth from their kitchen scraps, using one simple thing the modern pile is always missing. That black earth is where the very life for this tonic ought to come from in the end. A garden is not a thing you force by strength of hand. It is a thing you tend from the bottom up. My grandfather's tomatoes were the envy of the whole township, because he knew the secret was never in the vine itself. It was always in the dark ground beneath it. Now, while we wait for the season to turn and for our next talk on the compost, we must look at how this living brew behaves once it leaves your jar and sinks into the specific dirt of your own home place. Because a man from the red clay hills of Georgia will see a different rhythm than a woman gardening in the black, heavy earth of Illinois or the sandy stretches of the Jersey Flats. Stop and think about your own ground. If you told me in the comments that your soil is heavy clay, the kind that turns to slick grease when it rains and bakes into hard gray bricks when the July sun hits it, understand this. Your soil is not dead. It is just locked up. It has plenty of minerals, but they are trapped tight in those microscopic plates of clay, packed so close together that air cannot get in and the roots cannot breathe. When you pour this yeast tonic into that heavy clay, those tiny organisms go to work like a million invisible wedges. They feed on the molasses, they multiply, and as they move, they create tiny spaces. They stick the fine clay particles together into small crumbs. Suddenly, the earth softens. The next rain doesn't just sit on top in a greasy puddle. It sinks down deep, carrying the life with it. If you have clay, you will notice that within 3 or 4 weeks of using this recipe, the crust around your tomatoes doesn't bake as hard anymore. It stays loose enough that you can scratch it with your bare fingers. Now, if your dirt is light and sandy, you have the opposite trouble. The water runs through it like sand through an hourglass, washing away every bit of goodness before the plant can take a sip. A man with sandy soil thinks he needs to pour more and more heavy fertilizer to make up for it, but that is like pouring water into a leaky bucket. What your sand needs is not more chemicals. It needs the glue that holds life together. The fungi and the bacteria that wake up when they taste this yeast brew secrete natural, sticky substances, what the old-timers called the fat of the land. This natural biology acts like a sponge, coating the bare grains of sand and holding on to the moisture so it stays right where the hair roots can reach it. If you are working in sand, this tonic will help your soil hold its breath, staying damp hours longer after a morning watering. But there is a companion piece to this work that you must understand, or you will undo the good you have done. Once you have fed the life in the ground, you must protect it. The greatest enemy to the microbes we just woke up is the bare, beating sun. If you leave the soil around your tomatoes completely naked, the summer heat will bake the top 2 inches of earth until it is hot enough to scald an egg. That heat kills the very bacteria we just brewed in the kitchen. My grandfather never left a square inch of his tomato patch bare to the sky. As soon as the ground warmed up in June, he would walk between the rows with an armful of clean, dry wheat straw or old shredded leaves from the woods, and he would lay down a thick carpet 3 inches deep all around the vines. He called it a blanket for the earth. That mulch keeps the soil cool, shuts out the weeds, and keeps the moisture from drying out. Most of all, it keeps the sun from killing the small living things. When you pour your cup of tonic, you just pull that straw back a bit Pour it on the damp dirt and slide the straw right back into place. Underneath that blanket, the ground stays dark, moist, and alive, which is exactly how the forest floor keeps itself rich without any man ever buying a bag of fertilizer. While we are looking close at the bottom of the plant, let me give you one more piece of traditional practice that works hand in hand with our baking soda remedy. Look at the lowest leaves of your vine, the ones that hover just an inch or two above the dirt. As the plant grows tall, those lowest branches get old and tired. They sit in the dark, they get no breeze, and whenever a hard raindrop hits the bare ground, it splashes mud up onto those leaves. That mud carries the spores of early blight that sleep in every soil. That is how the sickness starts, crawling from the bottom of the plant all the way to the top until your vine is nothing but bare sticks. To stop that, take your shears, or just use your thumb and forefinger when the morning is dry, and snap off every single branch that grows within 10 inches of the ground. Keep the bottom of the stem clean and bare like the trunk of a little tree. This lets the wind blow right through the base of the patch, drying the soil surface and keeping the damp air from stagnating. When you combine that clean airspace with a single teaspoon of baking soda in your tonic, you create a wall that the common garden blights find very hard to cross. You might see a strange thing happen a few days after you pour your first batch. You might walk out in the morning and see a fine white web growing across the surface of the damp dirt, looking almost like a light frost or a thin cobweb. A modern gardener sees that and panics. He thinks his soil is rotting, or that some terrible fungus has taken over his garden, and he runs for a chemical spray to kill it. I tell you, when you see that white web, you stop and you thank the good Lord, because that is the sign that your tonic has done exactly what it was born to do. That white web is the mycelium, the beneficial fungus waking up and spreading its threads through the earth. It is the network that connects the soil together, breaking down the old roots and leaves from last year and turning them into rich food for this year's crop. It is the sign of a living ground. Remember, this is not a race. A garden is a conversation between you, the dirt, and the seasons. Do not rush it, do not double the dose out of greed, and do not look for a miracle by tomorrow afternoon. Just watch the color of the leaves, feel the texture of the soil under the straw, and let the old ways prove themselves true in their own measured time. As the summer weeks roll on, and July turns into the heavy, still heat of August, you will notice a great change in your patch. The vine stops rushing skyward. It settles into its true work, and those little green marbles we saw under the branches begin to swell, turning heavy and deep-ribbed. This is the moment where the long-term health of your soil really shows its teeth. Stop and think about the sheer workload of a tomato vine in midsummer. A single plant might be carrying 10 or 15 pounds of green fruit all at once, while still trying to push out new blossoms at the top. It is like a team of horses that has been pulling a light buggy all morning, suddenly being hitched to a heavy timber wagon at the bottom of a steep hill. If that plant is living on nothing but the quick energy of that blue store powder, this is where it runs out of breath. The chemical salt is gone from the dirt within a few days of pouring it, leaving the ground dry, hard, and empty. The plant's lower leaves will begin to yellow and drop off by the dozens, and the fruit it gives you will be small, thick-skinned, and sour. But when you have spent the early summer feeding the soil with this yeast brew, the story is entirely different. Understand this. Those millions of little living things we woke up in June are still down there working. They have spent weeks tunneling through the earth, turning your old manure, your compost, and your leaf mulch into a rich, dark soup that sits right at the root level. They do not sleep. They keep a steady, unbroken stream of food moving up into the stem of the vine every hour of the day and night. That steady feeding changes the very nature of the tomato itself. When you harvest a tomato grown from a living soil, you can feel the difference before you even cut into it. Pick it up in your hand. It feels heavy and solid, like a lead weight in your palm, not hollow or soft, like the ones you buy in a grocery store box. The skin has a deep, waxen luster to it, and the smell, that rich, sharp scent of the green vine, is so strong it stays on your fingers for hours after you walk out of the patch. And then there is the matter of the summer storms. In August, we often get those sudden, violent thunderstorms that dump 2 inches of water on the county in 30 minutes. When that happens after a dry spell, a tomato plant that was force-fed with chemical salts will drink too fast. Its roots suck up that sudden deluge, the water rushes into the fruit, and because the cell walls are weak and thin, the skins split wide open from top to bottom. Once a tomato splits, the flies find it by noon, and the whole fruit is ruined before it can ripen. But a plant that has been getting its regular cup of yeast tonic and buttermilk has built its house on a better foundation. The calcium from that buttermilk, unlocked and carried up by the soil microbes, has made the cell walls of the fruit tough and elastic. When the heavy rain comes, the skin stretches instead of cracking. Your tomatoes stay whole, round, and clean on the vine, even when the weather turns wild. Now, as we come to the end of the fruit setting time, there is one last adjustment you must make with your jar. Once the first clusters of tomatoes on the bottom of the plant begin to show that first faint blush of pink, what my grandfather called the breaking of the color, you can slow down with your tonic. You do not need to pour it twice a week anymore. Drop back to just once every 2 weeks. The soil is fully awake now. The empire beneath the ground is established. And if you keep pushing them too hard with the molasses this late in the year, you will encourage the plant to start growing new green leaves at the top when it ought to be putting every single drop of its spirit into ripening the fruit it already has. This is the cycle of the season. You work with the earth, you give it the small, honest helps it asks for, and it returns the favor tenfold at the supper table. My family has lived by this rhythm for nearly 200 years in this valley, and it has never failed to keep our cellars full. When we meet here next time, we are going to take this understanding of soil life and apply it to the place where all garden wealth begins, the compost pile. Because if you know how to wake up the microbes in a bucket of rainwater, you can use that same knowledge to turn your kitchen scraps and barnyard straw into a sweet dark earth that smells like the woods after a rain, without ever dealing with the slime or the flies that plague the modern gardener. I will show you the one missing piece the old people use to keep their piles sweet and rich. Until then, tend your ground low down where the life is, keep your water clean, and let the earth do what it was made to do.